When we think about what shapes history, our minds usually go to the big things, right? Battles and decrees, kings and generals. But what if some of the most profound changes were actually set in motion somewhere else entirely? Not on a battlefield, but in a theater, or over conversation at a party, or even within the pages of a cheaply printed pamphlet. Today, we're going to explore that hidden architecture of influence.
Napoleon Bonaparte. He wasn't a man who scared easily. And yet, this is what he said about a popular stage comedy. Not a military strategy, not some political treaty, a play. He saw it as the French Revolution not happening in the streets, but unfolding right there on the stage.
And that's really the question, isn't it? How on earth could a work of art, a comedy of all things, become so powerful that the most formidable man in Europe saw it as the revolution in action? What was the mechanism? How did laughter turn into a political weapon?
Well, to get to the bottom of this, we have to start with the play itself. Beaumarchais' The Marriage of Figaro. You see, this wasn't just entertainment, it was a weapon, brilliantly disguised as a farce.
Just look at the timeline. The play premieres in 1784. Only 5 years later, the Bastille is stormed and the French Revolution explodes. 5 years. That's incredibly close. And that proximity isn't just a coincidence, it's a symptom. It tells us that this play tapped into a society that was already a powder keg, just waiting for a spark.
And here is the absolute bombshell at the heart of the play. This line, spoken by the servant Figaro to his aristocratic master, it was electric. It was a direct assault on the very foundation of the old world, hereditary privilege. This wasn't just a clever bit of dialogue, it was a declaration of war on the idea that some people are simply born better than others.
The plot itself was the perfect vehicle for this message. The whole story revolves around the Count trying to use this so-called droit du seigneur, this supposed feudal right to sleep with the servant on her wedding night. And when the servants, Figaro and Susanna, brilliantly outsmart him, the audience wasn't just watching a comedy. They were watching a powerful fantasy play out in real time, intelligence and merit defeating corrupt, arbitrary power.
But here's the thing, right? A play, no matter how powerful, can't start a revolution all by itself. It was a spark, for sure, but the kindling was already piled high. It was just one part of a much larger ecosystem of ideas, a whole network that was busy rewiring the mind of Europe.
So to really understand how this all came together, we have to look at the platforms where these ideas were being shared, debated, and amplified. And two of the most important were the Parisian salons and the revolutionary press. These were the true incubators of change.
You might picture 18th century Parisian salons as these stuffy rooms full of powdered wigs and polite gossip. But that perception is, well, it's just wrong. These weren't just parties, they were the unofficial universities of the Enlightenment. This is where the real intellectual heavy lifting was being done.
And who ran these intellectual hubs? Women, the salonières. In an age when women were completely barred from formal politics and universities, they created their own centers of power. They were the ones curating the guest lists, steering the conversations, and ultimately deciding which thinkers and what ideas got a platform.
And you really can't overstate how important they were. As the analysis in the architecture of influence points out, they were power brokers who few could afford to ignore. They were, for all intents and purposes, the original influencers, controlling access to the most important intellectual circles in Europe.
And nobody embodied this power more than Madame de Staël. There's this incredible story where Napoleon, just completely frustrated by her constant criticism, had his brother ask her what she wanted. And this was her legendary reply. She wasn't looking for favors, she was wielding ideas as weapons. Napoleon himself called her a dangerous obstacle and eventually exiled her, which just goes to show how much he feared the power of her influence.
Now, at the exact same time, these ideas were hitting the streets through the press. Pamphlets were basically the viral media of the 18th century. Over in America, you had Thomas Paine's Common Sense, which laid out this crystal clear, undeniable case for independence, and in France, you had Jean-Paul Marat's ferocious paper L'Ami du Peuple, the friend of the people, which channeled the rage of the masses directly at the monarchy.
So you've got the stage, the salon, and the pamphlet. But this kind of scattered organic influence wasn't the only model. There's a much older story here about the very first attempts to truly systematize persuasion on a global scale.
It's pretty fascinating, isn't it? The word propaganda didn't start out with all the negative baggage it has today. It actually comes from this, the propaganda fide. It was an office created by the Vatican way back in the 17th century. Its goal was simple:
to propagate or spread the Catholic faith all across the globe.
What's really remarkable is just how modern this whole operation was. As described in Propaganda Fide and the role of apostolic nuncios, it was basically a central command center for managing a global message. Missionaries were like field agents, sending detailed reports back to Rome, which then used that intel to refine its strategies. It was, arguably, the world's first global PR machine.
So on the one hand, you have this very top-down, centralized model from the church, but contrast that with what popped up in 19th century America, the Lyceum movement. This was a completely decentralized, grassroots effort to spread knowledge and ideas.
And the scale of this movement was just staggering. It was founded by a man named Josiah Holbrook, and it exploded to over 3,000 chapters in less than a decade. And this wasn't the intellectual elite in some fancy Parisian salon. This was ordinary people in small towns gathering to hear the greatest minds of their time. Thinkers like Henry David Thoreau, orators like Frederick Douglass, writers like Mark Twain, and even a future president, Abraham Lincoln. This was the true democratization of influence.
So what's the thread that connects a play, a salon, a pamphlet, a missionary, and a public lecture? Well, they're all just different architectures for shaping human thought, and their underlying principles bring us directly to the world we live in right now.
The platforms have changed, of course. We're not gathering in a dusty lecture hall or a Parisian drawing room anymore.
That cheap revolutionary pamphlet that Thomas Paine printed? Well, today, that's a viral social media post that can circle the entire globe in a matter of seconds.
And those curated, influential conversations in Madame de Staël's salon? Now they happen in closed group chats, on private servers, or on platforms driven by powerful algorithms. The technology is brand new, but the fundamental architecture of influence hasn't changed at all. It's still about using compelling stories, creating exclusive networks, and broadcasting powerful ideas to the masses. Figaro's stage, Madame de Staël's salon, Paine's printing press, these were the tools for shaping the world. And the incredible thing is, those tools are no longer in the hands of a select few. They're in all of our hands, every single day. So the question we're left with is not about history, but about right now. What will you build?